Book of Haggai 2 verse 9. The latter glory of this house will be greater than the former, says the Lord of armies, and in this place I will give peace, declares the Lord of armies. This verse was spoken during a difficult and discouraging time for the people of Israel. The temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed years earlier, and after returning from exile, the people began rebuilding it. But there was a problem. The new temple did not look nearly as glorious as Solomon's temple had once been. Some of the older people who remembered the former temple were deeply disappointed. The new one seemed small, weak, and unimpressive. God sent the prophet Haggai to encourage them. The people were looking at outward appearance, but God was looking at his future plans. When God says the latter glory of this house will be greater than the former, he is revealing something powerful. God is not limited by what things look like in the present moment. Human beings often judge by size, beauty, money, influence, or visible success. God judges by his presence, his purpose, and what he is about to do. The first temple had incredible gold, wealth, and splendor. But the second temple would eventually be visited by the Messiah himself, Jesus Christ. That made its glory far greater than anything money could create. This is deeply relevant today. Many people feel like their lives are no longer what they once were. Some remember better days, better health, better relationships, better finances, better confidence, better faith. Some people look at their current situation and quietly think, "My best years are behind me." But Haggai 2-9 challenges that mindset. God specializes in bringing greater glory out of broken seasons. Sometimes what comes later carries more spiritual beauty than what came before. A person who has walked through pain, loss, failure, sickness, betrayal, or loneliness may become far stronger, wiser, gentler, and closer to God than they ever were during easier times. The world often worships youth, success, and appearance. But God often does his deepest work in seasons that seem disappointing on the surface. This verse also speaks to people who feel insignificant. The builders in Haggai's day probably wondered if their work even mattered. The temple seemed so small compared to the old one, yet God told them not to despise what looked small because he was building something bigger than they could understand. That still applies now. A small act of faithfulness can have eternal impact. A quiet prayer, a kind word, a person choosing not to give up, a parent caring for a child, someone continuing to trust God while carrying emotional pain, a believer standing firm in faith while nobody notices. God sees all of it. The final part of the verse is also incredibly important. In this place, I will give peace. The Hebrew idea of peace here is not merely the absence of conflict. It refers to shalom, completeness, restoration, wholeness, well-being, reconciliation, and inner rest. True peace does not come from circumstances alone. Many wealthy and successful people still feel empty inside. God's peace comes from his presence. Today, many people carry hidden emotional battles that nobody around them sees. Haggai 2, verse 9 reminds us that God is still able to bring peace into ruined places. He can bring peace into damaged families, fearful hearts, exhausted minds, broken churches, wounded relationships, discouraged lives. What looks unfinished to you may still be under construction in God's hand. The message of Haggai is ultimately hopeful. Do not judge your future based on your current appearance. God is able to bring greater glory later than what existed before. Sometimes the greatest chapters of life begin after the hardest seasons, and sometimes God builds the most beautiful things out of what people thought was ruined forever.